The night closed in around them like a living thing, thick and suffocating, swallowing sound and distance until even breathing felt too loud. The patrol had moved carefully through the ruined outskirts of the valley, boots crunching softly against gravel and broken stone, every step measured, every shadow watched. Then it happened, the kind of silence that doesn't feel natural. No insects, no wind, just the sudden, terrifying awareness that they were no longer alone. The first shot didn't kill anyone. It didn't need to. It struck a rock inches from the lead soldier's head, exploding sparks into the darkness and freezing the entire unit in place. They dropped instinctively, spreading out as best they could, hearts hammering so hard it felt like the enemy could hear them. A second shot followed, then a third, each from a different direction. It became clear within seconds what they were facing. Snipers. Not one or two, but many, positioned high, disciplined, patient. The unit was boxed in, caught in a kill zone carefully chosen long before they ever arrived. Radios crackled with whispered reports, coordinates overlapping in confusion as everyone tried to identify firing angles that kept changing. Every time someone shifted, a round snapped past, close enough to feel the heat. Fear crept in quietly, not the explosive kind that made men scream or run, but the cold, controlled dread that settled into the bones. They knew this situation. Every soldier did. Being surrounded by snipers at night meant time was the enemy. Stay still too long and they'd be picked apart one by one. Move too fast and someone would expose themselves. The darkness that once offered cover now worked against them, hiding the shooters while making every movement a risk. Sweat ran down faces despite the cold, fingers tightening on triggers that felt suddenly heavier. The men exchanged glances they didn't need to explain. They were trapped. Extraction was too far. Air support was impossible in this terrain at this hour. The enemy had the high ground, the numbers, and the advantage of preparation. Each second stretched unbearably long as they waited for the next shot, the next crack of a rifle that would end someone's life before they even knew where it came from. One soldier muttered a quiet curse. Another pressed his forehead into the dirt, steadying his breath, trying to silence the pounding in his ears. Above them, unseen, death watched patiently. The snipers were doing exactly what they were trained to do: apply pressure, isolate, and let fear do half the work. The unit wasn't fighting yet. They were surviving, pinned in a deadly circle of shadows and steel. In that moment, surrounded by darkness and enemies they could not see, it felt less like a battlefield and more like an execution waiting to happen. And none of them realized that the balance was about to shift, or that the darkness itself was about to turn against the hunters who thought they owned it. For several long seconds after the last shot echoed away, no one spoke. The unit stayed low, muscles locked tight, eyes straining into the darkness as if willpower alone could pierce it. Orders had stalled, replaced by the unspoken truth that no one knew what to do next. The situation demanded leadership, yet every option on the table felt like a gamble with lives as the stakes. It was in that fragile pause, when fear had settled but panic had not yet broken loose, that she moved. At first, no one noticed. She didn't shout or signal. She simply shifted her position with deliberate care, her movements smooth and economical, as though she were following a plan already written in her mind. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, steady and controlled, cutting through the tension more sharply than any command. She began pointing out details others had missed, the subtle echo of a rifle report, the way sound carried differently from the ridge to the north, the unnatural stillness of certain rooftops silhouetted against the stars. Heads turned to her, surprised, not just by what she was saying, but by how sure she sounded.
Until that moment, she had been just another member of the patrol, capable, reliable, but unremarkable in a way that made people overlook her when adrenaline took over. Now, as she calmly mapped the threat in hushed tones, something shifted. She named likely firing positions without hesitation, tracing invisible lines through the dark that suddenly made the chaos feel structured. The fear didn't vanish, but it changed shape, edged with curiosity and a flicker of hope. Someone asked how she knew. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She adjusted her gear with practiced hands, checking her rifle by touch alone, every movement silent. The way she handled her weapon wasn't flashy, but it was precise, intimate, like a musician tuning an instrument they'd played for years. One of the soldiers nearby realized she wasn't breathing fast like the rest of them. Her pulse, visible at her neck, stayed calm. That calm spread outward, contagious. When she looked up, her eyes reflected almost no light at all, focused on something beyond what the others could see. Only then did fragments of understanding fall into place. The quiet confidence, the way she'd always volunteered for night watch, the fact that she navigated darkness better than daylight. She wasn't just trained, she was specialized. Whatever past she carried, it had prepared her for exactly this kind of moment. While the rest of the unit had been reacting, she had been observing, listening, calculating. The enemy thought they were the only hunters in the dark. They were wrong. She leaned closer to the group and outlined a plan in short, efficient phrases, never wasting a word. It wasn't complicated, but it was bold, and it relied entirely on skills most of them didn't have. As she spoke, doubt faded from their faces, replaced by trust born of necessity. In a situation where rank and protocol had stalled, competence took command. By the time she finished, everyone understood one thing clearly. She was no longer just part of the team. She was the reason they might survive the night. At first, no one noticed her. In a situation like that, attention clung to the loudest fears, the sharp cracks of distant rifles, the whispered orders, the frantic scanning of blackened ridgelines. She lay low like the rest of them, pressed into the cold earth, her breathing slow and controlled, eyes open but unreadable. While others tried to spot muzzle flashes or trace the echoes of gunfire, she listened, not just with her ears, but with a patience that came from years of learning when not to move. She had been quiet since the first shot, and that itself was unusual. Panic had a sound to it, even when men tried to hide it. Tight voices, quick breaths, fingers tapping metal. She had none of that. Her stillness wasn't fear, it was calculation. The darkness didn't intimidate her, it informed her. Every pause between shots, every slight change in angle, every delay told her something about how many enemies there were and how confident they felt. This wasn't a sloppy ambush. These were professionals, and professionals followed patterns. The unit leader crawled closer, careful not to silhouette himself. His voice was low, strained. He asked if she saw anything. She shook her head once, then raised a hand, not to signal ignorance, but restraint. Wait. That single gesture carried more authority than words. He hesitated, surprised, then nodded. In the dim light, her face looked calm in a way that didn't match the situation, as if her mind had stepped into a different rhythm while the rest of the world raced toward disaster. Memories surfaced quietly as she lay there. Nights spent training without moonlight, instructors forcing her to navigate by sound and instinct alone. She had learned to read darkness the way others read maps, the way a rifle report echoed off rock versus trees, the faint scrape of fabric against stone when someone shifted too quickly above. Even the silence between movements had weight. She adjusted her position by inches, testing angles, counting heartbeats between shots, building a picture no one else could see. Someone behind her whispered her name, asking what they should do. She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, it was barely more than breath, but it cut through the fear like a blade. She told them to stay down, to trust her. There was no bravado in her tone, no promise of heroism, only certainty. A few exchanged looks in the dark, unsure whether to feel relief or doubt. They knew her as capable, reliable, but not like this, not as someone who could change the shape of a fight. As she slowly shifted her weight, preparing to move, a realization began to ripple through the group. The calm wasn't accidental. The silence wasn't fear. She had been waiting for this moment, not because she wanted it, but because she was trained for exactly this kind of nightmare. In the middle of a perfectly executed ambush, when everyone else felt hunted, the unit began to sense something else entirely. They were no longer alone with their fear. They had a protector they'd never truly understood, and she was finally ready to step out of the shadows.
The darkness that pressed in on the unit was no longer just an obstacle to endure. It became a resource, something she understood more deeply than anyone else there. While the enemy relied on night to hide their positions, she treated it like familiar terrain. shaping her movements around it with careful intent. She knew that darkness was not empty. It was layered with sound, depth, and subtle contrast, and those who rushed through it blindly were the ones who died first. She did not rush. She began by moving when no one expected movement at all, slipping forward in the brief gaps between enemy shots. Each step was placed with purpose, toes rolling softly to avoid loose stone, weight shifting low and balanced. The others barely noticed her go until she was already several meters away, dissolving into shadow as if the night had opened to swallow her whole. From her new position, she paused, letting the darkness settle again, allowing the enemy to believe nothing had changed. That belief was her first weapon. Sound became her guide. She tracked the snipers not by sight, but by the way their rifles spoke to the terrain. A shot fired from a ridge carried a sharper echo than one from a rooftop. The slightest delay between report and echo told her distance. She measured angles in her head, sketching invisible triangles that narrowed possibilities with each shot. Where others heard chaos, she heard a pattern forming, fragile but precise. She used the enemy's confidence against them. Snipers who believed themselves unseen grew careless in small ways, adjusting their stance too openly, whispering to one another, shifting positions without perfect silence. She waited for those moments. When she finally raised her rifle, she didn't aim where the sound had been, but where the shooter would be after making the mistake of thinking they were safe. Her first shot was quiet, almost polite, swallowed by the night before it could announce itself. One threat vanished without drama, without anyone else even realizing it had happened. She moved again, never staying in one place long enough to be guessed. The darkness cloaked her, but she never trusted it completely. She blended it with timing, with patience, with an understanding of how fear crept into disciplined minds when something went wrong and no explanation followed. The enemy began to sense it. Shots slowed. Pauses stretched longer than before. A sniper fired twice in quick succession, nervous now, trying to reassert control. That told her everything she needed to know. Her second and third engagements came just as clean, just as final. Each time she waited until the enemy revealed themselves through habit or frustration. She did not chase them, she let them expose themselves. The night did the rest, masking her muzzle flash, muffling her movement, erasing her presence the instant she acted. To the snipers above, it felt like the darkness itself was turning against them, striking without warning and leaving only silence behind. Back below, the unit felt the shift before they understood it. The pressure eased, subtle at first, like a weight lifting from their chests. The enemy's rhythm was breaking, their control slipping. None of them could see her, but they could feel what she was doing. The dark that had trapped them moments earlier was now being carved apart by someone who owned it completely, transforming fear into confusion, and confusion into the beginning of
Confusion spread through the enemy positions like a slow burning fire, invisible at first, but impossible to stop once it took hold. The snipers had expected fear, hesitation, maybe a desperate attempt to break contact. What they did not expect was silence. Long, unsettling stretches where nothing happened, followed by the sudden absence of one of their own. A position that had been active moments earlier simply went dark. No report, no reply, just nothing. In a profession built on certainty and control, that kind of uncertainty was lethal. She felt it before she saw it. The rhythm of enemy fire changed again, becoming irregular, almost hesitant. Where shots had once come with measured discipline, they now arrived in bursts or not at all. One sniper fired prematurely, the round snapping into empty ground below, a mistake born of nerves rather than calculation. She didn't punish it immediately. She let the fear breathe, let it spread. Panic, she knew, made people reveal more than any interrogation ever could. Another position shifted too loudly. A boot scraped stone, fabric brushed against metal. Tiny sounds, meaningless to anyone else, but to her they were beacons. She adjusted her angle, slowed her breathing until the world narrowed to a single thread of focus. When she fired, it was precise and final. The recoil absorbed smoothly as she melted back into shadow. Somewhere above, another threat ended, and the darkness reclaimed the space as if nothing had ever been there. The remaining snipers began to move, abandoning their carefully chosen nests in an effort to regroup. That was the mistake she had been waiting for. Movement in darkness betrayed intent. Silhouettes briefly cut against the faint glow of distant stars, outlines forming for fractions of a second, long enough for her trained eye to capture them. She repositioned again, always ahead of their fear, always choosing ground that favored patience over speed. She was no longer reacting, she was dictating the flow of the fight. One by one, the enemy disappeared, not in dramatic explosions or prolonged firefights, but in quiet, irreversible moments. Each elimination compounded the terror of the survivors. They whispered urgently into their radios, voices tight, asking questions no one could answer. Where is she? How many are there? Are we being flanked? The worst truth, that it was just one unseen presence dismantling them, never crossed their minds. It was too frightening to accept. Below, the unit sensed the change more clearly now. The cracks of incoming fire became rare, then stopped altogether. The oppressive feeling of being watched began to fade, replaced by a cautious disbelief. No one moved, no one spoke. They waited, trusting the silence, even though silence had terrified them before. Somewhere out there, in the same darkness that had nearly killed them, she was finishing what she had started. The final sniper tried to run. Fear stripped away discipline, turning training into instinct. He broke cover at the wrong moment, desperation driving him into open ground. She saw him instantly, the way you notice a sudden flaw in an otherwise perfect pattern. The shot was swift, merciful in its efficiency. When it was over, the night settled completely, unbroken at last. Only then did she allow herself to pause. The threat was gone. Every enemy that had once surrounded them lay silent, taken down not by force alone, but by mastery of fear, patience, and the dark itself. Dawn came slowly, as if the night itself was reluctant to let go of what had happened. A thin gray light crept over the horizon, softening the hard edges of the terrain and revealing what darkness had hidden. The unit remained where they were for several minutes after the last shot, unwilling to trust the sudden calm. Silence, once terrifying, now felt fragile, something that could shatter at the slightest mistake. When no enemy fire followed, reality finally began to sink in. They were alive.
She emerged from the shadows without ceremony, moving back toward the group with the same quiet control she had shown all night. In the growing light, they saw her clearly for the first time since the ambush began. There was no triumph on her face, no sign of adrenaline-fueled pride, only focus and a trace of exhaustion she allowed herself now that the danger had passed. Her gear was scuffed, her uniform dusted with dirt, but her posture remained steady, as if the night had been just another test she had trained for. No one spoke at first. Words felt inadequate for what they had witnessed, or rather, what they had survived because of her. The unit leader finally broke the silence, thanking her in a low, sincere voice. She nodded once, accepting it without comment. For her, the mission had never been about recognition. It had been about ensuring that everyone else saw the morning. Still, the looks in their eyes had changed. Where there had once been familiarity, there was now respect edged with awe. As the sun climbed higher, details became clearer. Enemy positions revealed themselves in the daylight, confirming what they had only guessed in the dark. The precision of what she had done became undeniable. These were not lucky shots or reckless risks. Every movement had been calculated, every decision deliberate. The battlefield told the story better than words ever could. The unit understood then that they had not simply been saved. They had been led through the worst moment of their lives by someone whose capability far exceeded their assumptions. During extraction, her name began to circulate quietly. Not shouted, not exaggerated, but spoken with a weight that suggested it would be remembered. Stories would change over time, sharpened by retelling, but the core truth would remain. When surrounded and outmatched, when fear had threatened to take control, She had stepped into the darkness and taken it apart piece by piece. That kind of legacy didn't need embellishment. Long after the mission ended, long after reports were filed and gear cleaned, the night would stay with them. Not as a nightmare, but as a turning point. They would remember the moment they realized survival wasn't always about numbers or firepower. Sometimes it came down to one person who understood the battlefield better than anyone else, who could turn disadvantage into dominance through discipline and mastery. For her, life moved on as it always did: training, missions, silence. But among those she saved, her presence had shifted from teammate to something more enduring. She had become a quiet legend, not one carved into stone or shouted in celebration, but one carried forward in respect, in trust, and in the unspoken certainty that when everything went dark, she was the kind of warrior who could bring the light back.